I stood in the rare book section of City Central Library, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and dust, my fingers brushing the spine of a 17th century volume I'd been cataloging all afternoon. March 24th, 2025. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the high windows, gilding the shelves I'd spent years tending. Silence wrapped me like a second skin, until it didn't. Still hiding among your precious books? Tyler's voice sliced through the quiet, sharp as a paper cut. I glanced up to find my brother leaning against a shelf, his designer suit a garish splash against the muted tones of my world. That smirk of his hadn't changed since we were kids. Smug, like he'd already won some game I wasn't playing. "Hello, Tyler," I said, keeping my tone even as I slid the book back into its protective case. "I didn't expect you here." My cardigan felt suddenly dowdy next to his tailored perfection, but I didn't flinch. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with a flourish that screamed money. "Mom sent me. She's worried you'll embarrass us at their anniversary party tonight, though." He cast a disdainful glance around. "I suppose it's too late for that." The library, my sanctuary, shrank under his gaze, but I met his eyes without blinking. "I'll be there," I assured him, standing to my full height. Even in flats, he towered over me, a fact he never let me forget. "And I'll dress appropriately." His grin widened, all teeth and no warmth. "See that you do. It's a big night. I've got news. Dad's golf buddies will eat it up." I nodded, letting him think I was impressed. The leather case clicked shut under my fingers, a small sound that steadied me. Tyler didn't notice the way my hands lingered, or the calm that masked something sharper beneath. He never did. "Don't trip over a book on your way out," he tossed over his shoulder as he sauntered off, leaving me alone again. I exhaled, already counting the hours until I'd turn his world upside down. Tyler lingered by the stacks a moment longer, his Rolex catching the light as he turned back to me. "Bought my third company this year," he said, voice dripping with pride. "Bennett Enterprises is a conglomerate now. Dad's over the moon, says I'm a real businessman." I nodded, feeling my hands tighten just enough to betray me if he'd been paying attention. He wasn't. "That's wonderful," I said, the words smooth as polished wood. "Congratulations." He didn't bother making his thanks sound sincere, just tilted his head like he was sizing up a disappointment. "You know, Lennox, there's still time to join the real world." He gestured vaguely at the shelves. "I could use someone to manage our corporate library. At least then you'd be doing something useful with all this." He paused, sneering. "Knowledge." The way he said it made it sound like a stain I couldn't wash out. I smiled, thinking of the laptop locked in my office safe, the meetings I'd taken under a name he'd never guess. "I'm happy where I am," I told him, letting the words hang between us like a challenge he didn't hear. He shrugged, already turning away. "Your loss. 7 sharp tonight. And Lennox?" He paused at the exit, smirking again. "Try not to bring any books this time." I watched him go, his footsteps echoing off the marble floor. The library settled back into its hush, but my pulse didn't. Tyler thought he knew me, thought I was the Bennett family's quiet failure, the 32-year-old sister who'd chosen ink over ambition. He'd never bothered to look closer, and that was fine. By tomorrow, he'd see just how wrong he'd been. I straightened my cardigan and headed for my office, the weight of my secret settling comfortably on my shoulders. I waited 5 minutes after Tyler left, long enough to be sure he wouldn't double back, before locking my office door. The space was modest, walls lined with books, desks scarred from decades of use. To anyone else, it screamed librarian, exactly as I intended. They never noticed the security system humming quietly in the corner, or the fact that my ancient desktop hid a custom-built core that could outpace most corporate servers. I opened my safe, pulled out the encrypted laptop, and powered it up. 3 windows snapped open. Video calls from Tokyo, London, New York. My real life flickered to the surface. "Good morning, Miss Maxwell," Grace Harper's voice came through, crisp and efficient. My assistant at 29 was sharper than most CEOs I'd met. The Nakamura deal is ready for final review. I scanned the documents on my screen, numbers and terms I'd memorized months ago. Thank you, Grace, I said, my voice steady. Has legal finished their assessment? She nodded. Yes, ma'am. The acquisition terms are solid. We can move whenever you're ready. I glanced at my watch. 5 hours until the party. Plenty of time. Schedule the signing for tomorrow morning, I instructed. And make sure everything's in place for the announcement. Already done, Grace replied, then hesitated. Are you sure about the timing? I thought of Tyler's smug face, the years of him dismissing me as the bookish Bennett, who'd never amount to much. Yes, I said, a quiet edge creeping in. Tomorrow morning will be perfect. I ended the call and leaned back, staring at the empire I'd built in the shadows. Maxwell Global Partners, no relation to Tyler's Bennett Enterprises, despite the echo, was one of the world's largest private equity firms. For 7 years, I'd run it while shelving books, a cover I didn't just tolerate, I loved. Who'd suspect a librarian of rewriting global finance? The salon was empty when I arrived, a perk of owning the building and keeping a standing private appointment. Stella Ortiz, my stylist and one of the few who knew my secret, waited with a grin. The usual? She asked, gesturing to a chair. Something more formal today, I said, settling in. Family event. She nodded knowingly. Ah, the famous Bennett anniversary party. Tyler was in earlier, talking it up to anyone who'd listen. I smirked, pulling out my secure phone to check emails. I'm sure he was. As Stella worked, I scrolled through updates on the Nakamura acquisition. By tomorrow, Maxwell Global Partners would own one of Asia's biggest tech manufacturers, the same one Tyler had been chasing for months. Your brother mentioned he's buying some big company, Stella said, catching my eye in the mirror. Couldn't stop bragging. I kept my expression neutral. He's trying to buy it. There's a difference. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. You didn't... I smiled, just enough to keep her guessing. Let's just say tomorrow's papers will be interesting. I tucked the phone away as Stella finished, my hair now sleek and elegant, fit for the part I'd play tonight. The dress waited at home, a deep green number I'd had tailored to perfection. Not flashy, but expensive in the way old money noticed. I'd look like the Lennox they expected, the bookish sister making an effort. They'd never see the billionaire beneath, not until I wanted them to. I pulled up to the Bennett family estate in my Audi, the engine's hum a soft contrast to the roar of Bentleys and Cadillacs lining the circular drive. March 24th, 2025, evening shadows stretched across the lawn, the mansion ablaze with the lights, like a jewel box, pried open for display. I'd chosen the car carefully, nice enough to dodge Mom's sighs, modest enough to keep questions off my librarian's salary. Henry Dawson, our butler since I was in pigtails, met me at the door, his nod as crisp as his suit. Miss Maxwell, he said, voice warm but formal, your parents are in the main hall. I stepped inside, the murmur of wealth washing over me, crystal clinking, a string quartet weaving through the air. Mom spotted me first. Margaret Bennett, 58 and still the picture of grace, glided over in a gown that cost more than my monthly rent, or so she thought. Darling, you look presentable, she said, her air kiss brushing my cheek. High praise from her, considering she'd never forgiven me for choosing books over boardrooms. Happy anniversary, Mom, I replied, returning the gesture. You look beautiful. She did, her elegance a shield against time. Dad's voice boomed across the hall before she could answer. There's my girl! Charles Bennett, 60 and tipsy already, waved me over to his circle of golf buddies. I wove through the crowd, dodging air kisses and polite nods about my little job. Walter Grayson, all silver hair and superiority, grinned as I reached them. Still messing with those books, Lennox? His tone made it clear what he thought of that. Someone has to preserve knowledge, I said, keeping my smile mild. They chuckled, indulgent, like I was a child with a quirky hobby. I let them laugh, my green dress catching the light just enough to fit their expectations. The night was young, and I had a role to play. The party hummed along, a sea of tailored suits and glittering jewels, until Tyler decided it was his stage. I stood near the fireplace, sipping champagne, when he raised his glass and called out, "Everyone!" The room quieted, heads turning to my brother, 35, and basking in it. His suit was new, sharper than the one he'd worn in the library, his Rolex flashing as he gestured. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, voice carrying over the quartet's last notes. I leaned against the mantel, watching him play the Prince of Bennett Enterprises. "As some of you know, Bennett Enterprises has been growing fast this year," he began, pausing for effect. "Today, I'm proud to announce we're on the verge of our biggest acquisition yet. By next week, we'll own Nakamura Tech." The room erupted, claps, cheers, Dad beaming like Tyler had hung the moon. Mom dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her pride a quiet echo of Dad's roar. "Wonderful, son!" Charles bellowed, clapping Tyler on the back. "A real businessman, just like your old man." I sipped my drink, letting the bubbles fizz against my tongue, the only sound I made. Tyler wasn't done. "The deal's not quite final," he added, grinning, "but my sources say it's just a matter of time. Papers are ready to sign." More applause, a wave of congratulations rolling toward him. He lapped it up, shaking hands, accepting praise, like it was his birthright. Then his gaze landed on me, sharp and smug. "What do you think, little sister?" he asked, his tone thick with condescension. "Ready to admit you backed the wrong horse?" The crowd tittered, eyes flicking to me, the bookish Bennett who'd never measure up. I met his stare, calm as the library at dawn. "I think," I said, pausing to let the words settle, "you shouldn't count your chickens before they hatch." He laughed, loud and dismissive, and the room followed, a chorus of indulgence. "Always so cautious, Lennox," he said, shaking his head. "That's why you'll never be more than what you are, hiding in your library while we build empires." I raised my glass slightly, a toast he didn't understand. Let channels flickered as I waited for him to turn away, but I stayed by the mantel, the fire's warmth a steady pulse against my back. Tyler thought he had me cornered. He had no idea what was coming. Dinner was served in the dining room, a masterpiece of mahogany and candlelight, the table set with china older than the house itself. I took my seat at the far end, a spot Mom had chosen to keep me from the important guests. The first course arrived, some delicate soup I barely tasted, as Tyler held court near Dad, regaling the table with tales of his business prowess. I kept quiet, spooning broth, nodding politely when someone remembered I was there. The air was thick with subtle insults, the kind I'd learned to let slide off me like rain on glass. Eleanor Grayson, seated beside me, leaned in, her perfume sharp and floral. "I just don't understand," she said, her voice low, pitying. "You were so bright in school, you could have done anything. Why waste your life with books?" She shook her head, her diamond earrings glinting. I set my spoon down, considering her question. In 12 hours, everything would shift, but for now, I stayed in character. "Books are never a waste," I said simply. "They teach us things aren't always what they seem." She frowned, clearly disappointed, and turned back to her soup. Across the table, Tyler's voice rose, recounting a deal he'd closed in Dubai. "The sheikh didn't know what hit him," he said, grinning as Dad laughed, a little too loud from the wine. Mom smiled tightly, her gaze flitting to me now and then, like she was checking I wouldn't ruin the night. "Lennox," she called down the table, "do try to mingle later." The Graysons brought their son, such a catch. I nodded, biting back a retort. They'd been shoving eligible bachelors at me for years, as if a husband could fix my failure. Walter Grayson chimed in from Dad's end. "Still at that library, eh? What's the pay like these days?" His chuckle invited others to join, a familiar hum of amusement. "Enough," I said, my voice mild, thinking of the penthouse I'd never let them see. "It suits me." Tyler caught my eye, smirking. "Suits you to hide, you mean," he said. And the table laughed again, softer this time. I sipped my water, tasting victory they couldn't imagine. As dessert came, chocolate tarts with gold leaf, Tyler stood, glass raised. "A toast," he announced, "to Mom and Dad, who taught me what success looks like. And to my sister, who, well, proves not everyone's cut out for the family business." The room chuckled politely. I lifted my glass, meeting his gaze, thinking of the press release set for morning. 12 hours, I told myself. 12 hours, and they'd choke on that laughter. The party thinned out by the dessert table, the quartet packing up as guests drifted toward the bar or the exit. I stood there picking at a truffle when Tyler sauntered over, his tie loosened, champagne flute dangling from his fingers. "Enjoying the party?" he asked, his voice slick with smugness. I popped the truffle in my mouth, letting the chocolate melt before I answered. "It's lovely," I said, keeping my tone light. "Mom and Dad must be so proud." His chest puffed out, the Rolex glinting as he straightened his tie. "They are," he said, leaning closer. "Would have been nice if both their kids amounted to something, though." His eyes flicked over me, taking in the green dress. Elegant, sure, but not his kind of flash. I selected another truffle, rolling it between my fingers, unbothered. "You know, Tyler," I said, examining the candy like it held secrets, "success isn't always about making the most noise." He snorted, loud enough to turn a few heads. "No? Tell that to my bank account. How much does a librarian make these days anyway?" I glanced at my Louboutins, a quiet indulgence he'd never clock. "Enough to buy these shoes," I said, meeting his gaze. He blinked, then laughed, dismissing it. "Right, you're good with money, should have guessed." He downed his champagne in one gulp, the glass clinking as he set it on the table. "Well, this has been fun, but I should mingle. Big day tomorrow. The Nakamura deal won't close itself." He grinned, like he'd already signed the papers, and turned to go. I pulled my phone from my clutch, the screen lighting up as I typed a quick text to Grace. "Everything ready for morning?" Her reply buzzed back instantly. "All set. Press release at 9 a.m. sharp. Want the final numbers?" I tapped back. "No need. I'll see them in the papers." Slipping the phone away, I watched Tyler work the room, shaking hands, laughing too loud. He thought tomorrow was his triumph, his name in bold print. I finished the truffle, savoring the bittersweet edge. He'd wake up to headlines all right, just not the ones he expected. The clock above the mantel read 11:45. I said my goodbyes, enduring one last round of pitying smiles. "Do consider Tyler's offer, dear," Mom whispered, her cheek cool against mine. I drove home in the Audi, the estate's lights fading in my rear view. Tomorrow, they'd learn what I'd built while they mocked me, the librarian who'd outplayed them all. I smiled into the dark, the road stretching out like a promise. I stepped into the library at 8 a.m., sharp, March 25th, 2025, my sensible shoes tapping against the marble floor. The regulars nodded their hellos, same as always, oblivious to the storm I'd unleashed. I'd kept my routine for 7 years, and today was no different, on the surface. Grace waited in my office, her tablet glowing as I locked the door behind me. "Everything's ready," she said quietly, her voice steady as ever. "Lawyers are in Tokyo. Press release goes out in 45 minutes. I set my bag down, powered up the encrypted laptop, and nodded. "Any word from Tyler's team?" She smirked. "They're still expecting to close Nakamura this morning. His lawyers are setting up now." I smiled, imagining his face when the rug slipped out from under him. At 8:55, my private line rang. "Miss Maxwell," Mr. Nakamura's translator said, "everyone's in position." "Excellent," I replied. "Let's proceed." Signatures flashed across my screen, a blur of confirmations sealing Maxwell Global Partners' ownership of Nakamura Tech, patents, subsidiaries, and all. By 9 o'clock, it was done. Grace tapped her tablet. "Press release out now." I pulled up news sites, watching the story break. Mystery buyer acquires Nakamura Tech. Maxwell Global Partners founder revealed. My phone buzzed. Tyler. predictably first. "What the hell is this?" he roared, no preamble. "Some sick joke?" I leaned back, calm as the shelves around me. "Good morning to you too, brother. I take it you've seen the news?" "This is impossible," he sputtered. "Maxwell Global Partners, you're not the founder." "Actually, I am," I said, letting the words sink in. "Have been for 7 years. I understand your confusion, though. After all, I'm just a librarian, right?" Silence stretched, broken by papers rustling, his breath jagged. "But I had a deal. The paperwork was ready." "Was it?" I asked, voice soft, innocent. "You might want to check the fine print. Nakamura's been mine for months." His voice cracked. "Who's we?" "My team, my company, my empire," I said, pausing between each. "The one I built while you mocked me." The line went dead. I glanced at Grace, who hid a grin. "How long until my parents call?" She checked her watch. 3, 2. Right on cue, Mom's number flashed on my screen, her voice shrill enough to rattle the glass. "Lennox Marie Maxwell, what have you done?" I held the phone an inch from my ear, her panic crackling through. "Good morning, Mom," I said, unruffled. "I'm a bit busy. Can we discuss this over dinner?" "Dinner!" she shrieked. "Do you have any idea what's happening? Your father's phone won't stop ringing. The Graysons, the club, everyone wants to know how our librarian daughter built a multi-billion-dollar company." I heard Dad in the background shouting, "Tell her to get over here now." I smiled, tracing a scratch on my desk. "I've got meetings all day," I said, which was true. Nakamura was just the start. "But I'd love to host you at my place tonight. Say, 7 o'clock? "Your place?" Mom's suspicion dripped through the line. "You mean that cramped apartment by the library?" "No," I corrected. "My penthouse on Highland Avenue. I'll text you the address." A long pause followed. "Highland Avenue?" she said, slower now. "That's the most expensive building in the city." "Is it?" I replied, feigning surprise. I hadn't noticed. "See you at 7 o'clock," I hung up, exhaling as 7 years of secrets spilled into the open. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Ready for phase 2? I nodded. "Send the second press release." She tapped her tablet, and I watched the next wave hit. Maxwell Global Partners announces $50 billion merger with East Asian tech giants. The merger had been brewing for months, time to follow Nakamura like a 1-2 punch. By tonight, the business world would reel, and my family would face the daughter they dismissed. I stood, smoothing my sweater, and glanced out the window at the city I'd quietly conquered. Meetings stretched ahead, interviews, strategy calls, but I'd carved out dinner for them. They deserved to see the view from the top, even if it bruised their pride first. At 7 p.m., the penthouse elevator chimed, and Tyler stormed in, his swagger replaced by fury. Mom and Dad trailed behind, shell-shocked, with Henry Dawson hovering, unsure how to square this with the Lennox he'd known. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's glow, my dining table set with understated elegance, catered by a restaurant I owned, naturally. "Welcome to my home," I said, gesturing to the view. "Drink?" Tyler ignored the offer, fists clenched. "How long have you been lying to us?" I moved to the bar, pouring a scotch, my movements deliberate. "Lying," I said, turning to face him. "I never lied. I'm a librarian. I love books. I just happen to run a global empire, too." "But why?" Mom sank onto my leather sofa, her voice trembling. "Why the deception? Why let us think you'd failed?" I sipped my drink, letting her question hang. "Maybe because you never looked past your assumptions," I said finally. "You saw the disappointing daughter who chose books over business. I let you." Dad stood by the window staring at the skyline. "All this time," he murmured. "Those mysterious acquisitions, that was you?" Tyler cut in, flat and hard. "Maxwell Global Partners. The shadow empire reshaping the market." I smiled. "It has a nice ring, doesn't it? Though I prefer knowledge empire." "You taught me that, Dad. Knowledge is power." He turned, and for the first time, I saw respect in his eyes. The Nakamura deal, he said slowly. How long? 6 months, I replied. I've owned their subsidiaries for a year. Tyler never wondered why they kept delaying him. My brother's face flushed, then paled. You outplayed me, he said, voice tight. Not playing, I corrected. Competing. Isn't that what you wanted? Dinner arrived, and we sat, tension thick as the sterling silver knives sliced through the silence. What now? Tyler asked, pushing food around his plate. Buy out Bennett Enterprises? I nodded to Grace, who slid him a folder. A partnership, I said. Your company has bones, mine has vision. Together we could build something bigger. You'd work with me, he said, incredulous. If you drop the ego and see value where you missed it, I replied. Dad set down his fork. She's right, Tyler, this is a chance. Mom dabbed her eyes. All those times we pitied you, she whispered. I softened. It's time to focus on substance, not appearances. By dessert, Tyler thawed, sketching ideas for our merger. Dad watched me, pride replacing his old bluster. I'd built this alone, but maybe they could join me now, if they learned the lesson. March 26th, 2025, I walked into the library at 8 a.m., nodding to the regulars in their usual spots. My face splashed across headlines, Lennox Maxwell, librarian turned billionaire. But they treated me the same, their quiet good morning, a comfort. I shelved a book, its weight familiar in my hands, as my phone buzzed. Tyler. Let's talk partnership. I smiled, whispering to myself, knowledge comes in many forms. 7 years of secrets had paid off, not in flash, but in something real. I was still a librarian, still loved books. I just happened to be a billionaire too. That was enough.